Hi, in this lesson we're going to be talking about desktop virtualization and showing you a couple of examples of some of the software you could use. So the first thing you need to know if you're going to be doing this on your desktop is that your processor has to support virtualization. So if you go into the BIOS or UEFI, depending on if you're running an Intel or AMD, you can look for the Intel virtualization. Could be called VTX or VTD. And then for AMD, it's usually called AMD-V. So you want to find that and enable it. There's a good chance it's going to be enabled by default in your BIOS. And then once you have that set, you could pick your virtualization platform and then install it and then try it out. So on this computer here, which is still running Windows 10, I have VMware Workstation installed and also Oracle VirtualBox. So if I click on my console here for VMware Workstation, you can see I have a Windows 11 computer running inside my Windows 10 computer, and I have tabs up here of other VMs that I have. These are not on at the moment, but I could have these running and then just toggle back and forth between them as needed. Then of course I have some tools up here for full screen and suspend options and restart and power off, send, control, delete, and so on. And I could just use the computer as if I were actually at the console, kind of like if you're doing a remote desktop session. And if I go to my library, I can see all of my virtual machines here, and then I can manage them by right-clicking on them. Go to Settings, and then I have my options for, how much memory is installed, how many processors, the hard drives, where they're located. If I want to mount an ISO file to the CD-ROM, have it connected at power on. Network adapter settings. So NAT's usually the default, so it'll share the IP address with the host for internet access. And then you could also do things like host only for private networking and bridge connections. USB settings, sound card settings. You could share your printer from your host with your virtual machines. Then display settings. And of course you have some of the more advanced settings here, such as sharing folders between the guest and the host, taking snapshots, which are images that you could take of a computer and revert back to it if needed. We have some encryption options if you want to encrypt your virtual machines. And for Windows 11, you will need to do that to add the TPM in order to run Windows 11 as a virtual machine. And then I have Oracle VirtualBox here as well, with a few virtual machines, some Windows and one Linux. You could toggle back and forth between them as well. Go to the settings. You can see the layout's a little different here. You have your system settings with the amount of RAM. So this one is running 8 gigs of RAM. And then you can see the boot order here for this. And here you can adjust the video memory allocated to the virtual machine, add additional monitors, set remote display options, recording if you want to record your screen. So here's the storage options for the virtual hard disks. So you can see here it's an 80 gig drive, but the actual size is only 13 gigs because it's a dynamically allocated drive, which means it's only going to be the size of what's needed and it will expand as necessary. So if I make this an 80 gigabyte drive, it's not going to take up 80 gigs on my host computer until it actually expands within the operating system to need all that room. Then you have some of the other audio settings, network settings, kind of like you see with a VMware Workstation, serial ports, USB, shared folders, user interface, and so on. So VirtualBox is free. VMware Workstation is not. I believe it's $200, but VMware Workstation, to me, at least in my experience, has much better performance than VirtualBox. And then you could also run the VMware Player for free, but that only allows you to run one virtual machine at a time, where with the other guys here, you could run as many as you have resources for. So as you probably know by now, the virtual machines are using the hardware on this computer. So this host computer has 32 gigs of RAM that I could use to allocate towards the virtual machines. And obviously I don't want to use it all because then the host computer will start to run too slow and then things will start hanging. So you just need to be careful how much of your resources from your host you're assigning to your virtual machines and then how many you're trying to run at the same time, because it's going to start taking its toll on the host itself when it starts using all of its resources. And then here I have the console for the VirtualBox running Windows 11 as well. So you can see it's kind of similar to this here. You have some menu options up here. Then you have various tools down here as well. This is more for monitoring. SATA ports, network, sound, USB, and that type of thing. So you can see here the host is running Windows 10, and I installed the VMware Workstation and the VirtualBox software within Windows 10, and then I could run my virtual machines from there. So Workstation and VirtualBox will run on Windows and Linux, and then you could run whatever guest operating systems you want, assuming that they are supported. And then one other thing too, if you're running a professional version of Windows, like Windows 10 Pro, Windows 11 Pro, you could install Microsoft Hyper-V, and of course you could run Hyper-V on the Windows Server editions as well. So to do so, you just go to your control panel, then you could go to Windows Features, or I just like to do a search for Windows Features, and then you could come here, turn on Hyper-V, make sure you have the ones checked that you want, which is most likely going to be all of them. Click OK, it'll do an installation. You might have to reboot, and then you could come back and then you could do a search in your start menu here for Hyper-V, and then you could start adding Hyper-V virtual machines as well. For the most part, Hyper-V gets along with the other hypervisors like Workstation and VirtualBox, so you should be okay running them all together at the same time. So once again, desktop virtualization involves installing the desktop virtualization software on top of the operating system that you're running on your desktop, like Windows or Linux, for example. And then once you have that installed, you could start configuring guest virtual machines that run other operating systems within your virtualization software. And like I said, just make sure you have enough RAM, processor, and storage space, because you have to store all the virtual hard disks on the computer as well. RAM is usually the biggest problem for virtual machines. If you have a decent processor, it's not really going to be a problem running multiple virtual machines at the same time. And then, of course, if you have a lot of storage, then housing the virtual disks shouldn't be a problem as well. And if you use the dynamic disks, they're only going to use the space they need until they need to start expanding, and then they'll start consuming more space.